Welcome to the Schrute Show, the show where I tell people they're wrong and correct them. Here's our first guest, James from the North.
Hello.
Can you elaborate? Can you explain the roles of Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Alonzo Herndon in the advancement of rights of African Americans in the New South Era?
Well, Booker T. Washington urged blacks to accept discrimination for the time being and to concentrate on elevating themselves through hard work and material prosperity. Alonzo Herndon was the leader of the community and many blacks looked up to him. His wealth gave him a way to help poor blacks. W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington are very similar.
False! They had very different ideas. W.E.B. Du Bois idea. He urged African Americans to get rights right now! Welcome back to the Schrute Show. Next guest is Jim from the South. Used to work with Jim pretty bad.
Hey, Dwight.
Can you explain the role of Henry Grady in the New South Era?
Well, there are multiple people who made an impact on the New South, but Henry Grady was a managing editor of the Atlanta Constitution in the 1880s. He played a very important role in the New South because he was the person who envisioned the idea of the New South, where northern investment, southern industrial growth, diversified farming, and white supremacy existed.
Wish I could say you were wrong. Can you explain the role of the Boston Triumvirate in the New South Era?
Well, the Boston Triumvirate refers to Georgia's three most powerful and prominent politicians during the post-Reconstruction era. They were Joseph E. Brown, Alfred E. Colquitt, and John B. Gordon. They were each a part of the government over the state's U.S. Senate seats and government's office from 1872 to 1890.
How do you know this? Do you cheat? Are you
Their
cheating?
political careers of all three men benefited from their service during the Civil War. Brown had served as the governor of Confederate Georgia, and Colquitt and Gordon had both risen to the rank of Major General in the Confederate Army by the end of the war.
You can't know this, Michael!
Michael!
Ah! Here's our next guest. He is an African American from the North. Can you tell us how African Americans were denied rights in the New South Era?
They were harshly divided among blacks and whites in Atlanta, Georgia in 1906. The riots lasted 2 days from September 22nd to September 24th. The estimated amount of blacks were 25 to 40 deaths, and only 2 whites died. This was when black neighborhoods were sharply divided of race. Democratic candidates disenfranchised black voters in newspapers all throughout Atlanta. During this period, black populations were surging through Atlanta. The population quadrupled during this time.
That's right, but you disgust me. And here's your question. Can you explain Tom Watson?
Tom Watson was a politician whose career was based on helping farmers, including tenant farmers and sharecroppers. He was a leader in the Populist Party and supported charges in bank policies to help farmers, and government control of railroads, and to end the convict lease system.
You're a very good person. Thank you. That's all for today's show. Come back next week and I tell more people that they're wrong. Darn it! Michael!
There's a little bit more information that I didn't tell you guys because I didn't want Dwight to start yelling at me, telling me I was wrong. But there is lots of anti-Semitism happening in the South, and one of the cases and examples was the Leo Frank case. So this was basically about a story about a Jewish manager inside a building factory, and one of the girls that were working there, she was 13 years old. She got very low pay, and she was found dead inside the building. So many of the Southerners hated Leo Frank because, one, he was a Jew, and 2, because they thought that she was being underpaid, and they thought that he was guilty, so they wanted to see him dead. And so there was no evidence except for one black janitor And his stories were changing many times every single time he got questioned. So was he a credible source? I guess we'll never find out. But so when they were questioning Leo Frank, the judges found him guilty and they sentenced him to death. But then another governor who had like a nice big future ahead of him because everybody loved him found evidence that he was actually not guilty, and they found evidence that he was maybe not guilty. And so he either could have chosen not to give him that proof to the judge, but he would lose his entire career. But he decided to, so he gave the proof, and so they lowered the sentence from death to life in prison. And the governor lost his entire future because everybody hated him for protecting this man. And on top of that, there was a group of people who secretly went inside the prison, and they took out, they kind of like kidnapped Leo Frank from the prison, and they took him to a forest, and they lynched him and they killed him. And many people were taking pictures of his dead body next to him about the postcards and stuff. So what I'm trying to say is that in the South there's lots of racism and anti-Semitism, and none of this was be able to be proven.
Ready, Michael?